Hello. Hi, everyone. Hi, Kamal.
Hey Joyce.
Welcome to the live stream. We have, actually, I think we have an action packed day for you. My name is Joyce. I'm a developer advocate and I'm based here in San Francisco. Kamal, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Kamal. I work as an engineering manager in the Bangalore office at Postman. So I work in the team that gets to build the Postman desktop application. And I worked on a couple of pieces of that application, and I would love to talk about them too.
You know, it's funny when I was doing the marketing for this live stream, I was like, oh, I need a picture of Kamal. So
Hmm.
I actually I found this blog post. You were one of the first people that we interviewed for Spotlight on
The
Engineering.
Spotlight series.
Yeah. So I want to post a
Oh,
link
I remember
here,
that one.
but I'm having trouble accessing the. Why have you forsaken me? Oh, here it is. Okay, so I'm going to drop a link to this Spotlight on Engineering, Kamal. I think you were one of the first people that we interviewed to get an insight into, um, just how does Postman Engineering operate and that kind of stuff. And I looked at the date, the published date on that. That was like 2 years ago. You were knee high to a grasshopper, and now you're engineering manager.
Yeah, and a lot of things that we've actually talked about in the blog has changed quite a lot. So I think we should do another refresh.
Yeah, I'm down. So today we have a special topic, and we'll get into the context a little bit later. But what department do you work on, Kamal?
So I work on a team that we call Client Foundation internally. It's basically looking at the client developer experience, which is right now the Postman desktop application. It also includes the Postman web experiences, which includes, I think, the team pages, the billing pages, the profile pages, and all the things that you can open on the browser. So we look at all the general experiences inside the Postman, things like your repeatable text editors here, your comment settings, and all those stuff and things like the general capabilities like tabs and stuff.
Yeah.
And you can also we also look at like the end-to-end experience of all the other engineers here at Postman building product capabilities inside of Postman. So we also look at the end-to-end experience, right from the designing of a feature, from developing to integrating, and then like observing them as such.
Yeah, so
So in the product that I get to work with, I mostly just like get to work with the Postman desktop application, which is like super fun thing to do.
yeah, so your team cuts across a bunch of things that people consider features in Postman. Oh, Videspa's here. Special guest Valentine was our guest last week. Valentine, if you have any feature requests, you can go ahead and drop them in the stream here. Um, okay, okay, we have so much to do today. I want to make sure we cover in case you missed it. Let's go ahead and start with some new features in case you missed it. Okay, so hopefully you see my incredibly messy screen. I had to do I'm on a new PC. I'm getting used to all things Windows. So here I am back at our friendly community discourse, and we every week we talk about features that are coming out, and stuff is coming fast and furious. Kamal, several times in this live stream, we've talked about autocomplete, which your team works on, and I think we'll get a sneak peek at in a little bit, or not a sneak peek, it's out already in production. But there's one kind of fun thing I wanted to show today. So normally we go to Postman News and we look at Arlemy has these beautiful summaries of what's recently released. I'm going to hit back. I'm going to go to Community Showcase. So people that have created things that are Postman related, they'll actually post here. And one of our very own Postman knots, Andrew Rodriguez, is on the creative team, and he created Snapchat filters and Zoom backgrounds. Kamal, do you Snapchat?
I don't
I
know.
am
That's a
way too
bad
old to Snapchat.
thing.
But this is pretty neat, and he came up with a bunch of different designs. I think he only has gifs of a couple of them here, but he came up with a lot of cute designs. So if you especially are getting kind of bored in meetings and you want to just put on a virtual background, you can check that out. But that's the only
That's fun.
thing that I had for in case you missed it this week. We do have two sessions. We do have Arlemmy's going to be working with Lorna Jane Mitchell of Vonage on Thursday, so make sure you stick around this week for that. But I'm going to go ahead and switch over to your screen, Kamal. So now you're screen sharing. I asked you what we're doing and you wanted to keep it a surprise. So do you want to tell me what we're going to work on today?
So like I said, I get to work on the Postman desktop application, and the things that I work on recently has been about like general features like text editors, like Monaco, which we'll talk about like in this stream. But the one thing I've actually like missed a lot is like working with APIs, and since like working in Postman, I've also like wanted to get in touch with that and try a couple of things up, right? So one of the interesting things that is out there is the GitHub API. So GitHub has been like a pioneer in like talking about APIs as first class products, and also they were one of the earliest companies to adopt like GraphQL.
That's right.
So I
Yeah.
thought like, why don't we just pick GitHub's GraphQL API and play around with it?
Okay, so today's going to be kind of exploration. Is that right?
Yep. So we're going to explore GitHub's API in Postman. We're going to do like GraphQL stuff. We're going to like build collections and run stuff that automate stuff. Just all the things that you would repeatedly do on GitHub. Let's see if we can automate them and make them repeatable.
Okay, and I don't think we've had a GraphQL topic before, but what you're talking about should be relevant even if you're working in like REST and stuff, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool, cool.
All right. Let's get started.
Yeah. Oh, and
Okay.
I do
So
want to mention, so today's kind of free form. Kamal, you do have something in mind, but for the people that have joined us in the chat, if you have questions about, I mean, I was kidding about feature requests. I know Valentine will put feature requests here, but if you have questions about like, oh, how did Postman Engineering decide to come up with that? Or Kamal, feel free to share any stories that you have about the engineering process behind it, because I personally think that's kind of interesting.
absolutely, sure. Okay, I might also like cover a few things that are in the pipeline that might get released in the next upcoming features, upcoming releases as well. So
Kamal,
that's going to be like
is this your
a few things.
history?
This is not my history actually. So this is an empty account that I've created just for the demo. So if you look at the handle, it's Kamal Twitch
Demo.
demo. So I've created this so that we can use this as a sandbox to play around with the project that we're going to do right now. So what I have right now is just like a GitHub account. So I'm just going to quickly create a repo on this one, and which we're going to be using for the rest of the stream to play around with it. Right? So this is going to be our sandbox to work with. So I'm just going to set this as public and then publish. Okay, so we have a clean, empty GitHub repo. All right, so I'm just going to quickly go ahead and pop a link to this repo in the chat. So we're just going to be like using the GitHub's API to crawl this repository. We're going to look at issues in this repository. We're going to look at all the stuff that is in the repositories. So if any of you would want to go ahead and create issues on this thing, you're going to see your name pop up when we query for like issues and stuff on Postman.
Okay, so it's empty right now, but go ahead and add your very important issues. But know that this is a demo account, so these are not real issues. If you have real issues, go to the real Postman Labs org. But this is just for the sake of today.
Absolutely. And this is where you would post real issues about Postman. That's our Postman GitHub /Postman lab /Postman app support. So that is where actual feature requests and issues go. So we're just going to close that for a bit and come back to the demo account. So this is purely for the demo purpose. And we're just going to be creating random issues. We're going to be querying them through APIs, and then we're just going to be like automating stuff inside of Postman.
Okay, let's do it.
All right, so I'm just going to quickly like figure out how we can get started with the GraphQL API. So I'm just going to start with, let's say, the GraphQL Explorer in Postman, in GitHub, sorry.
Hey, Kamal, do you use
Yeah.
GraphQL in your job at Postman?
So I was actually like part of the engineering team that built the GraphQL feature in Postman. That was about like a couple of years ago. So I mean, like about like 1 year ago, I think. So by the time we had that feature, we did not have any GraphQL APIs inside of Postman. By now, we already have a GraphQL endpoint that we are playing around with. We've actually started partially integrating some flows of the product into the GraphQL endpoint. So we also have the REST-based endpoint, which powers like most of the product. So almost everything that you see in the desktop application from your collections and APIs and workspaces, all of that is powered by our REST APIs, but parts of the web application experience. So if I just quickly go and open my profile here, that opens the web application. So parts of this is actually built on GraphQL. So it's a bit of both. Okay.
Yep.
Cool. So we have the GraphQL Explorer here, which is going to just like has a sample query inside. So that's all the things that we have right now here, right? So I'm just going to quickly execute this one, and then I can just see my login account here, right? So I'm just going to try to bring this into the context of Postman, right? So how do we basically get started with the same GraphQL endpoint experience that you have in this GitHub GraphQL Explorer, and bring them into the Postman application itself, right?
Oh, I thought it was pronounced graphical. I've been saying graphical.
I might be saying it wrong.
I
So
don't know.
graphical is also a good way to say that. Okay, so what I'm just going to do is basically, so you can also go to the GraphQL documentation and get started and just figure out figure out how to get the endpoints, how to get the authentication set up, and the basics. But what I'm going to try to do is quickly just get a head start by poking around like what the Explorer itself is doing, right? So I know that this GraphQL Explorer is going to be making GraphQL requests to the Postman to the GitHub API endpoint. So I'm just going to try to sneak around and see like what this is doing, right? So I'm just going to pop up my network tab and then send a request on my GraphQL experience, and then I see like one XHR call going out, right? So, and then in here is where I see the preview response that gets shown in the response viewer of GraphQL.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do is quickly use this as a head start to populate the working environment inside of Postman. So what I'm going to do is just like right click on this and copy this. So you can use a couple of copy options in Chrome DevTools. So one of the things that I'm going to do is just copy the curl version of this request. So I'm just going to copy this and go to Postman and then say I'm just going to import and just fill in this one, right? So once I do that, I would have a request tab open with GraphQL endpoints populated into the body.
Yeah, a lot of
Right?
people don't know you can
So
import as curl.
yeah, it's actually like a very easy way to get started with things if you're like looking at like any particular website or an API, and then even if you are building the front end experience of a product where you get to build the UI, and then you are talking to your backend APIs, and then you want to quickly just take that as a base and then start and go dive a little deep in Postman. So one of the things that you can do is just pop in the network tab inside Chrome DevTools, right click, and then copy, and then you would have the option to copy it as a curl. And this is just going to give like the curl variant of the same network request that went over your browser. And then you can just go ahead and pop it into the import option in Postman, and that's just going to import the same request inside of Postman.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is, so we have a base here. So I'm just going to quickly also create a new collection so that we can use that collection to save things as we build stuff here. Okay, I'm just going to filter this up so that I have the collection. Okay. So we have a base collection, we have base request. So like good thing, it is already set the method to post because all GraphQL methods by default are post. There are variants of GraphQL APIs that also use get, but in this case, GitHub has chosen a post method for their GraphQL. So it's set like the method as post, it has the endpoint. So if you look at this thing, this is slightly different from the public GraphQL endpoint that GitHub exposes. So we'll come to that in a bit, but we also have the GraphQL body in populated, and all the headers that we just extracted from Chromium DevTools as well, right? So I'm just going to quickly just try sending this one, and then it's going to fail, right? Actually, it didn't.
Whoa.
Because I have, okay. I think I know why. Because we have the headers also copied with this request. So it's actually like a much better experience doing this because you also have all the things that you would need to send the GraphQL request inbuilt and copied into this thing so that all your authentication and all of that stuff is copied and populated here. So let's actually try to recreate the same thing in a collection so that we're also able to do the authentication and other experiences inside of Postman.
So Kamal,
so what I'm,
your body right
yeah,
now,
Josh.
your body is raw JSON. Like why aren't you converting it to like the GraphQL body format?
That's interesting, right? So the GraphQL body type, right? So if I'm just going to quickly switch the UI, and it splits the views into a query and variable section, right? So each GraphQL query is made up of two parts, the query section and the variable section. And so if we actually inspect any GraphQL query, we would find that both of these sections are actually combined into like one big object and then sent in the body, right? So if we were to create new requests in Postman and populate these two fields, it's going to be transformed into a single object that gets sent into the body. So when we reverse engineered the whole thing, we actually saw that how actual GraphQL requests are sent out on the wire. So now what we can also do is basically, but this experience is not that great, right? So basically, me looking at the query of GraphQL in the GraphQL Explorer, it's nice, it's formatted. There's like auto-completion there, but the same experience is not there in the raw JSON body of Postman, right? So to get there, the GraphQL type of body is going to help us, right? So we're just going to quickly transform this body into the GraphQL type of body, and then we'll populate the same request into that. So we now have the same request populated using the GraphQL type, which will give us a lot more features. It'll give us like specific syntax highlighting for GraphQL. It will give us like specific features like auto-completion and stuff like that. But this is finally how the requests are transformed and sent.
So like literally, it's raw JSON works, but it's unattractive and it's a big blob and it's not comfortable to work in. It's not comfortable to edit this query.
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. Right. So if anyone's playing around with the GraphQL API that's on the bleeding edge of the spec, which is trying out new popular features that they might want to actually transform the network payload that is actually sent, which is not possible using the just query and variable section. You should be able to do it just by like populating the raw body with a similar format and doing it.
Okay, cool.
Right? So as we go through this, I just want to also like cover like a couple of things, cool things that you can actually do inside of Postman, especially with the things. I know that Joyce, you also wanted to talk about the Monaco and the text editor parts. So I'm just going to like talk about one particular feature that I like a lot, right? So it's just this beautify capability, which I can just do this command B shortcut and it automatically formats this thing, formats the JSON. It's really useful when you're importing stuff and copying and pasting stuff, especially when you're working with JSON, when you have like a lot of deeply nested things and you want to neatly organize them. So having this beautify capability, it's available both in the button that you can click here and also as a keyboard shortcut. You can press like Command D and it's just going to beautify this thing.
And were you going to tell us more about the Monaco editor?
Oh, sure. So if you see the new Postman experience, I should say like relatively new, the ones that are in at least like a couple of versions now. So you would see the Postman response viewer, the request viewer, a couple of other views as well, like the script editors and things, have a slightly different visual and behavior experiences. Right? And that's because we've actually replaced the underlying editor that is powering all of these experiences. So we used to use an editor that we call ACE editor, and we have replaced that with Monaco text editor itself. Right. So for those who are curious on what the Monaco text editor itself, so it's built by Microsoft as part of the project and the team that builds the VS Code. So if you look at, if you open VS Code and open any particular file in VS Code, the actual content area that you see, the bigger blocks where the contents of the file are displayed. So if you could just pull that part of the code base out of VS Code and publish that as a separate module, that would be Monaco. Right? And that's exactly the way that it works. So VS Code team builds and maintains this VS Code project. And they also have this nice little script that they run that just pulls out this particular piece of the project and publishes them as a separate module itself, right?
Oh, that's
Which
really nice
anybody
of
can
them.
use. Absolutely, right? So if you look at how the origins of some of these things actually like came about, so the Monaco team that built the Monaco project was actually also the team that built the Visual Studio Online experience. So from the beginning, although the majority of the use case of VS Code has been this desktop application, which is Electron based. So Monaco as a text editor was actually built for web experiences, right? So it's, I should also say VS Code is Visual Studio Code. Thanks, VS
We
for
also
bringing that
have
up.
Foma Born said glasses, beard, heart. I think he was talking about beautify. Not sure what that means, but I think
Uh,
it's good.
I'm also classes and period.
Oh, is that what it is? Okay, got it.
Okay, so Monaco as a project itself started as an editor that is going to give like really solid and usable experiences for authoring on the web. Right? So as a project itself, it is built for using text editor capabilities on web-based technologies that anybody can just like consume and use it in any of their projects. Right. So one of the interesting use cases that Microsoft had was this source code views inside their browsers. So if you look at Chromium and then go into the sources tab here and then pull up any one file inside this thing. Okay? So this view is going to show like the source code of the JavaScript that is powering this website, right? So one of the things that the earlier versions of Microsoft Edge browser did was actually use the Monaco project inside the source view of the DevTools of the browser itself. Right? So they could just like pull that project out and then inject it into the DevTools project of the Edge. And that's just showing their source code inside. So it's from the beginning, it has been built and thought about for web experiences and also as a reusable module so that anybody can just go ahead and just pull out that feature. So if you look at any particular product, you can also, anything that displays and edits text, you can replace them with Monaco.
So where are all the areas that in Postman we switched from Ace editor to Monaco? The,
So a couple of places that I can show, right? So this is one of the most used parts of the Postman where we have done this replacement is the response section. So where you see the JSON responses, right? So the pretty view and the raw view. So both of these are actually like the new text editor, which is powered by Monaco, right? So this gives us a lot of benefits and advantages. So a couple of, one actually nice and interesting story that we can talk about here, right? So generally text editors work with nice and clean and formatted files, right? So you just open your text editor, you open a new file, and then it's just like cleanly formatted into new lines. It's indented, and you have like short lines, but like long file. But the moment you actually go into web pages and the source code for the web pages, it's just like one big blob of minified code. That's just a single line that has like infinite number of characters there. So the moment you would want to replace this source view of the DevTools on Edge with Monaco, so you had this really big performance problem of how do you deal with one huge line, right? So one interesting thing that VS Code did was like specifically optimize for this one use case and improve the experiences, where now you get to have a really solid experience in terms of performance on both the short files as well as like one really long file, right? So I'll tell you like where it comes useful for us, especially when you're working with Postman as such. So if you go to any HTML page, right? So let's say I am just going to go to postmanecho.com. So this is going to give me the documentation HTML page. And the raw view of this is just going to be this one huge line of text, right? So if you're working with really large text and really large responses in Postman, you would want them to be like a lot performant. And that's a benefit that we've gotten out of the box by replacing Monaco in these areas.
Okay, so you're talking about the response viewer, and you're calling it text
Yeah.
editor, even though we're not editing it. I thought it was just the pre-request script and tests area, test tabs.
So this is just a text editor in purely read-only mode. So I can talk about like other places where we have also done this, right? So we can talk about the JavaScript area, right? So the pre-request script editor and the test script editors. We can also talk about the body section of a request. You have like multiple parts of the body. You can have the JSON one. You also have the GraphQL variant of the body. Both of these sections of GraphQL are powered by the new Monaco experience. So a couple of things that you can actually like do, right, so let me show you this one particular thing that you can do, right? So I have set my body type as raw, and I'm going to switch my language to JSON. And so one thing I can do is use Postman variables inside the request body. So I'm just going to say, let's say, name, and then I'm going to use, let's say, a Postman variable inside here, right? So one thing I can do is start typing the curly braces. And as soon as I start typing any of this, I'm just going to get like all the autocomplete suggestions for every Postman variable that you can use.
Man, that would have helped me.
I know, right? So, and it is also a lot contextual in terms of what you already have. So if you just quickly switch to one environment and anything that has values in it, yep. So you're going to also start seeing those pop up here, right? So one question that I always get from people who are experiencing like autocomplete is, hey, like I have this syntax, and then I know that when I start typing, I'm going to get like autocomplete. For example, let's say I'm going to start typing like S, and then I get all the variables that start with S, right? But what if I actually want to pull up all the list of variables before I start typing the first character itself, right? So one thing you can do is just go to any position that you would want to use the variables, and then press this control space shortcut. And the control space shortcut works both on Mac as well as Windows and Linux. So as soon as you do the control space shortcut, it's just going to quickly pop up all the variables suggestions that you can do at any one point in time.
Wait, control space, and then it's gonna, like, you have a environment selected, so it's gonna suggest those first, and then it's gonna list every single possibility?
Yep. So anything that you would see in anything that you can use in this context is just going to be populated in that list.
Cool. I'm gonna use that.
I know, right? So you can also do the same thing in the script editors in JavaScript. So a thing that we had recently shipped, which Joyce talked about in the start of the stream, is bringing the same auto-completion experience into the JavaScript world, which is the pre-request and the script editing experience. So let me just show you a couple of things that you can do here, right? So I can just do let x equals, and then as soon as I do, let's say I'm just going to pull up my environment variable, right? So I'm just going to do pm dot, and then it is immediately going to start suggesting me what the all the methods and properties I have on the PM object. So I can just pull up any one particular property. So if anyone's wondering, hey, what is this? I want to know a little bit more about this property. You can click on this eye icon, and then it's just going to give like a detailed description of this particular method or property itself. Right? So as soon as I do pm.environment and then I do dot, I get like all the methods on pm.environment. I can do like get or set, and then as soon as I do get, and so this is where I'm going to be finding one variable inside my environment. So if I know what I'm looking for, I can just start typing and it's going to suggest that. Otherwise, I can also just do control space, which is just going to list all the variables that I have in my environment.
I have like all these questions, but I want to make sure we have time to get through the GitHub workflow. But something that I have heard somebody ask before, like even in VS Code, like sometimes the autocomplete is just too much. There's like VS Code is trying to be so helpful, and like yet I'm getting overwhelmed. Is there a way to turn off autocomplete?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the actual configurations, there is a way to do that. So right now we haven't exposed that in the settings area that you have right now. So if you see, the only option that we have is the font size, which you can control for the editor. But we are also exploring other set of features that we can expose for users to come in and change and tweak to their particular configurations. Like so one thing that you mentioned is, what if I just want to turn off like auto completion and then I don't want that experience? So a thing that we would like to build and ship in the upcoming releases is the ability for someone, if they would want to choose to disable that. Another thing is, let's say if you're working with any particular part of your code. So things like if you type the bracket, then it closes their bracket, right? So if you type a single quote, it closes the single quote. If you type double quote, it closes the double quote. Sometimes it's helpful. Sometimes people feel it gets in the way. So that's also another thing that it's a possibility that we can expose as a customization,
Yeah.
as one of the settings that might come here.
Okay, sounds good.
So
So
it's a good feature
coming
request.
soon. Yes. Okay.
Absolutely. All right, so we're going to go about transforming this one ugly mess of GraphQL query into neatly formed GraphQL requests inside of Postman. So
You haven't even
I'm just
saved
going
it to a collection yet. You have an empty collection.
to... Okay, so let's do that. So I'm going to populate and save this into GraphQL. I'm going to edit this. So I'm just going to call it get issues because I'm going to turn this into a query that I can use to get all the issues from the GitHub API itself. Right. So I know that this is the endpoint that the graphical explorer internally uses to do this thing, but the public endpoint for directly querying the GraphQL is slightly different. Right. So I'm just going to pull up that endpoint that I can use inside.
So if you just joined us, we have a link. I'm going to go ahead and drop a link to the demo repo here in the chat. Go ahead and create some dummy issues.
Okay, so we have this one particular documentation about GraphQL. Okay, so one thing I'm going to do is just like take a quick guess on what it's going to be, right? So let's say we want to try doing it for api.github.com/GraphQL. Oh, okay. So it requires authentication. So I'm just going to quickly transform this into HTTPS and quickly populate a token that we can actually use for making these queries.
Do you need the secret shield?
So I'm going to be using the demo account, which
Okay.
does not have anything else. So I'm just going to quickly create one on this one. So in case anyone's wondering how you might populate access token that you can use for GraphQL, so the first part of this documentation should have a link to how you can get your own access token and use for your GraphQL APIs. Right? So we're just going to follow the steps and then populate one. Right? So we're just going to go into settings. Developer settings, personal access tokens, and generate one. Right. So I'm just going to call it GraphQL because I'm going to use it for GraphQL and set access to public repos. So we are able to query anything related to public repos with this particular token. So I'm just going to quickly come back here and
You're hard coding the token?
I know.
We tell people to use environment variables.
Okay, so let's come to that, right? So I actually let me just create a new environment and okay. Okay, so I'm always going to use the current value here because that's the safest option to use in variables, and it doesn't accidentally get leaked to anyone else on the team. So since we're also on the team of Space, we don't accidentally have the chance of leaking my token to anyone else.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so just going to quickly undo. Oh, yes, I know what's wrong.
What's wrong?
We haven't switched the environment.
Oh, Starlink environment.
Okay, so now we have the endpoint for GraphQL, but it's basically just dumping a bunch of data. So this is because we've made just like a GET request to the GraphQL endpoint, and it's just returning the entire schema of the GraphQL endpoint of the GitHub v4 GraphQL API. So it's right now it is not the query experience that we want to do, right? So what we would want to do is switch to Post and switch to GraphQL. And now this is where we can start typing in the query, right? So one thing I'm going to do is just quickly open up this particular request. So I'm just going to close all the other tabs. So another thing that you can do, neat little thing, is if you're always bothered with tabs and this prompt that is asking, hey, do you want to save this? Do you always, if you always like have tabs that you have to be opening and closing, you can say check this option, which doesn't prompt you for each tab that you want to close, right? So you can just check this and say, hey, I don't want to save this. But if you go ahead and close a tab, it's not going to ask you for every single time. So, but what happens, let's say if you have something important and then you close that by accident, right?
Yeah.
So you can also do this other feature where you can just go to a recently closed tab and then pull it back. Right? So it's always going to pull back your saved request with all your unsaved changes as well. So you never lose anything inside of Postman.
Well, I didn't know about that one either.
Did you know you can also do the same thing with the Command Shift T shortcut?
Oh, just like a browser.
Yeah.
Huh. Nice.
So I'm just going to copy this particular query and just put it inside. So what I've done is basically just looked at the query section of the GraphQL request, which is going to go into the query window of the GraphQL body type, and the variable section is going to go to the variable section. We're not going to worry about the variables for now. We're just going to quickly go and copy this and pop it into the query section of the thing, right? So if you look at this, it's slightly messed up and not probably the way that you would want a GraphQL query to look like. That's because we copied the encoded version of the query. So it basically took the entire actual query and encoded them, replacing all the new lines with slashes so that it can fit inside a string, right? So I'm going to try reformatting this, right? So I use this one neat trick that you can use to quickly edit bulk text. So I'm just going to press Command Shift L. That's going to highlight every occurrence of the same selection. So what I did was just basically just click on a particular location, selected the word that I'm looking for, and then I just did Command Shift L, right? And then it selected every occurrence of the same word. Right? So and what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace every occurrence of the same word with an actual new line. So I'm replacing slashes with actual new line, which is just by me pressing enter. Right? And it's just formatted this entire query into a nice little
Oh my gosh. What was that again? Is Control Shift L on Windows?
Yes, so I'm going to do it once more. So I just selected any word and I just did Command Shift L on Mac, Control Shift L on Windows and Linux.
Oh my gosh.
And then just replacing it and then it just formats this entire thing into a new line. Right? So now you automatically see the query and the subsections of the query syntax highlighted properly. Right?
That's
So now I
beautiful.
can go about.
Wait, Kamal, I have a question. So since this is all
Yes.
stemming from the Monaco editor, if are these the default key bindings in VS Code as well? Do you know?
Yeah, they are. They are mostly right. So VS Code also has the ability to customize, but by default, whatever key bindings that you have in VS Code are also going to extend here. So a nice trick is to pop up like the shortcut cheat sheet in VS Code, and almost like all of them should work in Postman as well.
Is there a way in Postman to customize your key bindings?
So right now, Postman allows you this one capability that you can use to turn on and off. This comes in handy for people who are using non-standard keyboard layouts, where let's say if someone has a different language or layout configured for their particular use case, and their actual character that they would want to type messes with one of the Postman shortcuts. So you can go and turn it on or off. That allows people to completely disable or enable shortcuts. We don't have the ability to customize the key binding for each shortcut individually, which is something that is also in the works. Okay, so I have at least like somewhat formatted GraphQL query here, but it's not completely formatted. So I'm just going to do Command B shortcut and just like do a little bit of tweaking here, right? And removing a bunch of extra new lines. And then that's it. We have a GraphQL query that we can run. Okay, so we have exactly the same result that we saw on the graphical explorer inside of Postman. So although we have the GraphQL experience of querying, we don't get the full experience, right? So if I am typing, let's say, username, right? So I don't get like the autocomplete experience inside of Postman. That's because we haven't populated the GraphQL schema.
No schema.
Yeah. And so I'm just going to quickly try populating that. So I'm just going to see if we already have any APIs with GraphQL schema here. Oh, we don't. Okay. So now I'm going to try getting the GraphQL schema for the GitHub and put it inside of Postman so that that powers the auto-completion API for GraphQL.
Okay.
So this is something that general consumers of GraphQL don't think about, because any consumer experience automatically does it for them. So GitHub GraphQL Explorer automatically does this. It populates the schema by just querying the endpoint, and then populates it into the documentation viewer that you can use. So inside of Postman, since you would need to explicitly create an API and populate this, so we're going to use almost the similar workflow that this one would do, right? Which is basically querying the same endpoint and then getting the schema and then populating it inside of Postman. So let's see how we can pull the schema out of the endpoint itself, right? So what I'm trying to do is how can I query the introspection endpoint of GraphQL and get the schema out of that GraphQL endpoint. So I'm just going to do get GraphQL schema from endpoint. Okay, this looks interesting. Okay, so this is an module that is basically a utility that will hit the same endpoint and introspect and query the schema and then store them locally so that you can use the schema to build on top of. So what I'm just going to do is use this module to populate the schema for GitHub GraphQL endpoint and populate it into the Postman app.
So if I'm an API developer and I'm working with like a public GraphQL API like GitHub and I don't have access to their schema, I would use this module to get it and then import it into Postman so I have autocomplete.
Absolutely. So if you are creating the GraphQL endpoint, you would have the schema with you. But if you're working with an endpoint that you don't have, you can use the same endpoint to query the schema, right? So that's the introspection aspect. of GraphQL. So we don't have that inbuilt in Postman yet. It's another thing that is on the queues as a feature request. So we can also go to the anyone on the chat who is listening into the stream, just go to the GitHub tracker and give a thumbs up for the feature, and we'll let you know once it's there.
It's the introspection feature?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm going to do this particular thing. The usage is I just run this module. So I install it globally, and then I point it to the endpoint for which I want to get the schema out of, right? And so one thing I don't like is creating global installations for modules that I use only once. So I'm going to combine the npm install global and the query into a single command, and then just do npx.
Can you zoom in a scotch on the terminal?
Sure. Is this better?
Are you showing any? Is your prompt in the? I don't see your prompt.
Yeah, my prompt is on the last line of this thing, so I'm just going to do this. Okay.
Ah, perfect. Yes.
So I just did this one particular command that combined the installation and the execution. So it doesn't leave around like stray global binaries that is pointing to my env that I might need to like clean up. So this works really well for any module that I would want to just install and use only once.
So I would use npx instead of npm-g.
Yeah, so that's basically just combining the global install and the execution of the command. So it's just combining both of them into one. It's just doing that. So I'm going to take this and point it to the endpoint for GitHub API that we want to play around with. And then it's not going to work because I think, we haven't given the authentication for this one. Okay, so I'm going to figure out a way to pass the authentication header. Okay, so I have this one flag that I can pass it down as -h space I'm going to use the same authentication that I have for my GraphQL request. So one thing I can do is just send this request, look at the console, and figure out what the actual authentication header was sent for this one. And I can also do the same thing using the live headers or hidden headers that are shown here. Right? So I can see the authorization header and the actual value that is passed. So I can also copy this quickly and paste it here. So this command just like populated, fetched the GraphQL schema from the endpoint that we provided and dumped it into the terminal. But what we would want to do is take this and then put it back into Postman. So what I'm just going to do is pipe it to my clipboard. And
This is so meta. So you started off in graphical to execute a query, and then you copied as curl, imported it into Postman, and now you're able to do a little bit deeper inspection that you would have been able to do in Chromium DevTools, but now you have it persisted and like you're working on it, and now you're now you're using that to sniff the authorization key to then use it in your terminal. It's very meta.
we're going in circles and spirals and going deeper and deeper.
We must go deeper.
Okay, so I'm going to create a create a new API inside of Postman. So I'm going to call it GraphQL, GitHub GraphQL, and call it draft because I don't know the version. And just say this one is GraphQL. Okay, so now I have an empty API that's created that's pre-populated with a nice empty schema, but we don't need that because we actually have the schema. So I'm going to replace with the one that I just copied.
Oh.
So you're probably like wondering the schema is too big, right? So it's just 23,000 lines of schema. But you would, if you're authoring this schema inside of Postman or even like copying it and pasting it for a workflow like this, so you would almost not see any lag or issue when scrolling over or typing, right? So I just like trigger the scroll and just like flushes over that, right? That's because the Monaco editor is actually optimizing for the view that I'm looking at and not the total size, right? So it's always looking at this particular 10 lines and it's processing only 10. So at any point, it's always a constant.
Ooh.
So anyway, if I'm working with something like this or even let's say a big response, anything that is too big for me to look at any point. So one thing I would want to do is just like remove clutter and focus on a few things. So one thing I can do is basically just like fold some aspects, and then that will help me just like combine or crush all of the things that I'm not actively looking at, and then focus on a few things other than that, right?
Crush it.
So one I'm going to do is I'm going to do crush all, and just like that, it crushed every
Wait, how did you do that?
part of the game. So I'm going to do the opposite, and then I'm going to walk through how I did that. So I just uncrushed all of this. So I did the shortcut, which is Command K followed by 0. Right? So it's Command K and then 0.
Is K for crush?
It could be.
Arlamy, right? Yeah, this is like so the thing is it takes me a long time to learn keyboard shortcuts, as Arlamy can attest to. Um, are these in the settings, that shortcuts area that you showed us earlier?
Interesting. Oh, we don't have them here. Actually, we should put them here.
Okay, so feature request.
Feature request.
That's so cool. So
Coming soon.
you crushed them all, you folded all those sections, and then you unfolded all the sections.
Yeah, so I am also going to walk through the shortcut you can use to unfold all of them, which is just the same sequence, but with J. So I'm just going to do Command K and lift it and then do J.
Command J0?
So that is Command K and J.
Okay.
Right. So if I do Command K and 0, it's going to fold all of them. If I do Command K and J, it's going to unfold all of them.
Okay, so you crush and you Jun crush.
Okay, so now we have the GitHub GraphQL schema populated into one of our APIs. We have sample requests. I'm going to close this and save this into the collection instead.
So Kamal, you said, sorry to interrupt you while you're typing, but you said that the Monaco editor by default will optimize and only kind of not have that entire specification in memory. It just kind of pulls what's in view. What about for autocomplete? What's the performance like for autocomplete with such a huge schema?
So it's always gonna, if you think about where the general issues are, the size of the thing, it's always a constant. So whatever I'm using in terms of the schema, the size of the schema is always going to be constant. The problem generally comes when translating that schema into individual view elements and then putting them on the UI, right? So that is where a lot of the performance bottlenecks come in. And it is to get this particular view of syntax highlighted text, right? So where the comments are syntax highlighted differently, different parts of the query are syntax highlighted differently. It also adds metadata, where the size of the metadata is what blows up incrementally with the size. So as long as the size of the thing that you're processing is less, So the size of the metadata is less. So the problems are generally with the UI and not the things that is in memory. So what is in memory is going to power the autocomplete. So that is always going to remain a constant. Okay, so I just did like a refresh a couple of times, and now I have this new API that we created. So this one is already like filtering the APIs that I have in this workspace by which are of type GraphQL. So I have GitHub popping up here. So once I have this API selected, I think I should have the auto completion showing up now. Oh, there we have the name. Oh, my name is not. I haven't populated my name. Okay, we can actually try doing different things now. So once we have the auto completion, we can go to different parts of the query that we can play around with. Right.
Okay.
So since we have titled this thing as issues, let's actually try getting in issues here. So I know issues are going to be under repositories.
Okay.
So I'm going to try querying the repository. So as soon as I type in, I get like the autocomplete, and I can just populate this one, and I'm going to do this. Right.
Wait,
so
you're writing a query without looking at the docs?
That's what the autocompletion is for, Joyce.
Okay. All right. All right, let's see what happens.
Okay, so we have this, right? So as soon as I type the field, I have this warning icon that shows up here. So if I just quickly hover over them and look at this, right? So it shows me what's wrong here. It's telling me that I need the owner aspect of it, right? So basically, I'm just querying the details of the repository without giving like what repository am I querying about. So do you see this red icon on the scroll bar?
Yeah.
So that's basically just showing me the position in the big text where this error is in. So this comes in handy when I'm working with like a very large text. So especially, let's look at this one thing that's like 25,000 lines long, right? So if I'm intentionally introducing an issue by removing a character here, I have an error. So it is going to be incredibly hard to find where that error is on a text that is 25,000 lines, right? But I can quickly use the scroll bar to directly go to the position where the error is, and then I can easily find that. So I'm going to do it like once more. So
wait, what was the error?
So that is the one that I had intentionally introduced to showcase this one thing.
Oh.
Right? So I had basically
Okay.
just went to one place and then deleted a parenthesis.
Got it.
And now I have this error
Okay.
showing up. So if I just undo, it's not showing. Okay, so coming back to this one, this error, if I hover over this, it's telling me that I need, this one is hard. Okay, so I'm going to peek, which gives me the full view of the errors. Okay, so I need to put in the owner aspect of the repository. So the repository name on GitHub, if we go to the demo repo that we are using, it's the username /repo. So I need to give the owner of the repo and the repo name so that I can uniquely identify that repo.
Okay.
To owner. Oh, auto completion.
Oh, imagine that.
Okay. I know Joyce is going to be like, use variables.
Well, you could use a GraphQL variable, no?
Okay. Let me just populate the query and see if it works.
Okay.
And then we'll go
Okay.
into the GraphQL aspect.
Yeah, that highlighting in the scroll bar is kind of neat. Just to locate, like it's like sometimes you see like the badge, or I don't know if it's a badge, but in the row numbers.
So it shows up, if you have any errors in the query, it shows up both inline inside the character where it is wrong and also in the query section here. So if you're using, I'm going to demo one more thing. Just going to create an open API schema here to quickly demo one side feature. So I've populated an empty open API with default schema populated here. So it shows both the inline errors and the one on the scroll bar and also one on the left-hand side, right? So which also has like a slightly wider space, and hovering on it will also give you like the thing. So this is an actually like useful feature for someone who is using and writing open API schemas inside of Postman. They could basically just inline figure out what the problems is without just saving it, compiling it, and executing it.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see if this works. Oh, it works.
Autocomplete.
You want to do GraphQL variables, right, Jazz? Let's do it. So I'm going to do.
I did a demo once where we chained the GraphQL variable syntax into the GraphQL variables editor on the right side of the page into a Postman environment variable.
Oh, that's what we're going to do
Oh.
if it works. Okay, so I'm just going to say no.
Oh no. Spoilers. So can you just talk us through what is the syntax? I don't know GraphQL very well. What is the syntax for using a GraphQL variable?
So what we're saying is that this particular part of the query is going to be a variable, and that's identified by this dollar sign that's preceding it. So anything that starts with the dollar is going to be treated as a variable. Right? And then if someone's familiar with the JavaScript syntax, this is similar to a function name and function parameter. So you can just assume the query as the function definition, where the parameters are the variables that you're supplying into the query body itself. So you can think of this as a function body, and you can think of this as the name and the arguments.
Got it.
And the variable that you're supplying here starts with this dollar sign. And then another thing that GraphQL lets you to do is match and validate types so that it knows what type of each of these things are, which you can use to statically validate for things that we're seeing here, right? So we're basically seeing that the owner is of type string, but it's required, right? So and the required part of the string is captured by the exclamation point towards the end. So it's not going to allow me to execute this query until I match the exact same type this input is expecting versus the one I'm passing.
Got it. And we have, I think this is a feature request in the chat. Tensoriality says, not sure if it's related, but could you guys put the line numbers in fatal errors in pre-request scripts and tests so that they can know where an error would be?
So this is something like this, where I have an invalid script and then I execute them. This one. Oh, that's an interesting thing. So basically, once you have the error, you would want to know what line the error is in. Oh, that's an interesting feature request. We should be able to do that.
Done. Tensoriality, done. Check in next week. Just
in
jokes.
case you missed it.
In case you missed it. Stuff does get
Okay.
done pretty fast though. Sometimes like the engineers don't know about like a feature request or a possible solution, and then stuff gets done. I was kidding, Tensoriality. It's not going to be next week, but stuff does happen pretty fast.
Absolutely. Right. So once we started shipping these new text editor experiences in the request body, so we exposed this to all the other engineers inside of Postman, and then talked about this, saying that, hey, these are all the things that you can do now. And then this is an interesting thing that happened, right? So one of another quality engineer in Postman, Danny, he hangs around a lot in the Postman community as well, answering. And he is the author and maintainer of the Newman HTML extra reporter. So which is like a pretty famous
Danny
Newman
Dainton,
reporter.
celebrity.
So he reached out to me saying, hey, this looks really cool, right? So why don't we do it inside this particular view, right? So where my workflow is generally just like copying a request, going into an import, and then putting it here, right? But let me take an example where we can talk a little bit more about this thing, right? So I'm just going to do the same thing that we did at the start of the stream. I'm going to send a request, open, snoop around the network tab, copy this as curl, and go to Postman and import this thing. But as soon as I import this, it's not that pretty, right? So it's just a bunch of characters that are that get meaningful as soon as I import. But at this point, like I still don't know like what this import text is, and if I want to make any modifications where I just like copy it and paste it here, like I won't be able to understand this. So wouldn't it be nice if it had the same syntax highlighting and features of this view, right? So which is basically the code generation view inside of request. Which gives a little bit better view of parsing and identifying separate parts of the code itself, right? So we were wondering, like, wouldn't it be nice if we had this inside this import view, and then all of a sudden, like a couple of days later, like a completely different Postman engineer comes and says, hey, this is a thing that we're actually doing, and it's going to come in the next release. So keep your eyes out. It is going to come where this import raw text is going to have a Monaco editor with syntax highlighting.
Wait, so is Danny responsible for that feature request getting done, or was it just kind of like great minds think alike?
I think it just happened coincidentally.
Yeah.
I don't know. I might have to check with Danny. Okay, so now we have. So this is basically telling me an error saying that I have specified the variable as owner, but I haven't given like the owner for this one. So I'm going to do owner here.
Hi there, Philip. We're just getting started. Well, oh my God. We're just on our first request here in this collection, working with the GitHub GraphQL API. I hope people created issues because otherwise we're going to be scraping an empty repo. Here, I'll drop the link to that in case people joined.
Oh, we have two.
Oh, nice. Is that foreign? Oh, Lorem ipsum.
One of them is there.
The Despa says it's Latin. That's not real Latin, though, is it? You know, one time I was talking with an executive, not at Postman, but an executive, and I was like, they're like, I can't read anything on this page. And I'm like, that's lorem ipsum. Don't worry. And then he was like, I don't know what that means. And I'm like, oh, it's just like placeholder Latin. And he was like, oh, I don't speak Spanish because I think he thought I meant like some language from Latin America. And that was an executive from IBM, where Arlemi's from. Okay, so what did you just do?
So I populated a GraphQL variable for the owner here, and then I did this variable syntax, and then I've also had the same thing populated in my environment, right? So now I can have the same variable populated through my environment, and I can control it by swapping out like two different GraphQL environments. So
Nice.
if I send this, right, so I get this one because there's a JSON parsing issue. Right? So I have this owner variable defined with like a value set, and I have the value set, but it's still showing me an error there, right? So this is most likely because I have the quotes missing around it. And it works now.
That's what Valentine taught us last week. To be proper JSON? Is that why?
One thing I generally think about, right, is what makes a valid JSON after the variables are replaced. And this is an easy way to actually think about this thing, right? So anything, if we pop up the environment variable, so if we just assume that this thing is going to be replaced inside this as an empty string, right? If that makes a valid JSON, then we're good to go. right? So if I had an environment variable here that had the codes inside of them, that would still be a valid JSON.
Got it.
So as an extension, this is a general use case that some of the users might run into, which is I have this variable that is under this syntax, and then I have like quotes around them, and it works for strings, right? But what if I have a dynamically generated variable that is sometimes null and sometimes an actual value, right? So if I had replaced this with null, so it's not actually going to be null, but it is a string that contains null. So that's a common problem that people run into when working with scenarios like this, right? So it's not very ideal in most of the scenarios. So maybe one thing that we could do from Postman side is to be type aware, where we understand the type of Postman variables and automatically do the surrounding replacement for them, right? So for strings, it gets replaced with quotes. For nulls, we know that it's actually null. But until then, there is a nice workaround that you can use inside of the your scripts, where you can just say pm.variables.set. So you can create a temporary variable here, let's say owner replaced, and you can replace it with actual quote surrounded variables if it's a string, and just null if it is null, right? So what you can do is you can do pm.environment.get. So I'm going to be using a ternary to check. So I'm going to say if it is null, just return the string called null. Otherwise, just return something that has a code inside of it.
So you're handling the possibility of either a null value or a string value in a pre-request script with
Yeah.
with
So that's
a temporary variable.
that's a workaround for cases where people have to replace sometimes strings and sometimes null characters inside their code. Okay, coming back. All right, so now we have the repository queried. Let's go ahead and try pulling in issues. So I'm going to start typing issues, and then it shows me suggestions for issues. Okay, so I don't know exactly what is going to come inside of this, so I'm just going to do control space, and control space is going to show me all the possible fields that I can query inside of this GraphQL object, right? So it shows me like edges and nodes, right? So I'm not completely sure what this is about, but I know that issues is a list, right? So I'm guessing it also has properties called, okay, so it has a thing called page info. So it's most likely that issues is paginated. So what we're going to do is look for GraphQL pagination. Okay, so basically what we have is any list followed by an identifier on where the page starts, and edges representing each item in the list, and the node containing the details of that. Okay. So let's try doing the same thing. Okay, edges. Oh, node. Missing pagination boundaries. Okay, I think I need to go back and put in pagination definitions. Okay. So now we have the first 5 issues populated. from GitHub.
Wait, is that first 5? Is that just how GraphQL queries take like a parameter that would have said give me 5 results? Like
So
a
what this query is telling is that I have a list and I'm asking for the first page of the list. And this is how I define what the size of the first page is. And I'm just saying, just give me like the first 5 of this thing, right? So one thing I can also do is let me see all the ways that I can query this list, right? So if I do, okay, so I don't really have a nice auto completion for parameters. So let's try to find this equivalent inside the schema.
Well, we don't have to go down this rabbit hole. I was just wondering if that was a GitHub API thing or a GraphQL thing.
So it's a GraphQL convention that GitHub has applied here, right? So if we go into what page info is, we can, there's so many instances. I think it's going to be hard for us to find the first one and the definition of this one. But if you go into one of these things, it's going to tell us what ways you can query the first page of any GraphQL.
Yeah, got it. How many issues are there?
I think there's a way to get that as well. Total count. I'm going to do the same thing, which is
crush it. Oh, too crushed.
Too crushed. Okay, we have 3 issues so far.
Good work, team.
Why don't we pull up the names of people who have created the issues? Okay, there's an error.
There's a squiggle.
Okay, I think I need to query the fields inside of them. I'm going to query the login field of every author who's created an issue in this. Oh, there we go.
Videspa. Bhargav Karanam.
Okay, what do you want to do next, Joyce? Do you want to create like an automation around it?
Yeah, so like Postman engineering and actually every team in Postman does a lot of automation around collections and like piping stuff into Slack, piping stuff into summaries. Maybe we could just build like a quick monitor around this because I don't think we've talked about monitors a ton, but never showed it. And it's actually not hard.
Okay, so what do we do? So do we create like a monitor that fetches all the issues and then loops over them and leaves a comment?
Yes. Let's do that. Oh my gosh. Okay, so we're like running short on time. Let's see how fast you could do JavaScript. Kamal, do you still code? Do you still code as part of your job?
I do sometimes.
Sometimes, because your title is manager now.
Well, like managing is not an exclusive job at Postman, so we get to do like all of this stuff.
So Tensoriality suggests to pipe it into a Slack notification. Although you don't have a webhook, inbound webhook set up, do you?
No, we don't. Okay, let's try to actually build one thing quickly, right? So basically querying issues, and then why don't we just loop around and close all of those issues, right? So that by the end of the stream, we have all of these issues closed. One thing you can do very nice with this thing is also put a little bit of logic around that. Let's say if you want to query all the issues in a repository and close all the issues that have been like open, for a very long time and like attended for a long time, you can do that as well and build this collection as an automation.
Tensoriality says check the length of the messages and compare versus previous value. So I like the idea of looping on all the issues and just closing them. That's what we do at the Postman team. We just close them, have good velocity, length of array. And Kevin Swivers is saying something about GraphQL API is implementing the cursor connection spec. Gosh, Kevin Swiber knows so much.
Oh yeah, that's true. So it uses the cursor-based pagination, where you can say, "Give me a page." So what we saw was the way to query the first page. So what Kevin is talking about is using the cursor specification to query any page in the middle as well. So then you can say, "From this point, give me like 5," right? So that helps you to query like any particular page that's in the middle of the whole workflow as well.
If you didn't specify first 5, would it return all?
It would not allow me to query. That's the error that we saw, right? So it says that, hey, you cannot query
You
without
need
giving
that.
a
Got it.
perm per page. Yes. So what I'm trying to do is just get like the IDs of the issues, and we can use that to close all the issues. I'm just going to make sure that we have the IDs populated. Do we have IDs? Oh, we have IDs. Oh, okay. Now we have IDs in the response. We're going to loop them in the scripts. I'm going to go to the test scripts because that is where I have access to the response. So I'm going to get the response.
These are legitimate issues here. Sorry, go ahead, go ahead.
So this is one thing I'm trying to do, which is basically just give me the JSON equivalent of the response. So pm.response.json gives me the JSON formatted one. So I'm going to look up the response to figure out where my issues are.
Ooh, autocomplete.
It's not smart here because it doesn't know what the response is here. So it's just auto-completing based on all the words that it has previously encountered in the same script.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. Oh, because it doesn't know response yet. Yeah. There's a question. It's a weird question. Do you usually use let instead of var in Postman?
So this is a preference. This is a matter of preference in Postman. I use let a lot because when I'm working in general with JavaScript applications, it helps me keep things in the scope of the things that I'm working on, either the function or the classes. But inside of Postman, every individual script that you're running is a scope on its own. So if you have things in prerequest and test scripts, they are completely different scopes. So the scope is already handled by that, and var versus let difference doesn't bring in that much of a benefit. But if you are working inside the script, let's say with functions and creating functions inside the scripts, is where like you can take the advantage of the scoping with it. So by default, using vars should work. It's just a matter of preference for me.
And I see you're using semicolons.
Too. Let's not go into
I know,
that.
I know. The Despa says var is typically considered outdated. Let and const is recommended. So outdated. Where's quiet?
So what I've done is basically just transformed this list of issues and then put them into a list of IDs, and I get undefined. So that's an interesting thing. Okay, that's because each one is a property called node, and each node has a property called ID. I'm going to clear this, send this once more. Okay, so now we have a list of IDs. What I'm going to do is, let's see if we can put this into a variable. So one thing that you can do is use pm.variables.set. So this creates a scope that that remains within the execution of the collection, and it's not stored with your environment or global. So if you want to store like temporary variables, you can just dump them into pm.variables, and they will be available within the execution, and they'll be like thrown away after this thing is done.
So that you don't have to clear them at the end, right?
Yes.
And last week we learned that there's a difference between clear and unset from Valentine.
Yeah. Okay, so so now we have one request that is querying all the list of issues and populating all the issues and storing them into a variable here. And so now we can do the closing part. So I'm just going to quickly duplicate this one request. And then, so what we'll do is basically just do a request that closes one issue, and then we can loop them over the issues and then try closing all of the issues as well. So I'm going to take one of the issue IDs and then use that to close here. Clear all of them. So I know that like closing is an action and query is purely for reading. So all the actions are going to be under mutations. So I'm going to try looking at mutations and see if I can get hold of, oh, there it is.
Does your token scope allow you to close?
I think it should make sense.
Okay.
Okay, so when I type in I, it says I need an input. Okay. I'm going to try figuring out what this thing is. Oh, okay. So now it's an object that has the ID. I'm going to pick one for now, which we can automate it as a variable. So this is going to, this part of the GraphQL query is what is returned as an output after the action has been completed. So I'm just going to say what is the state of the issue after it is done. So it should ideally just give me state is closed. I have an issue here. I think it's the codes that are wrong. Okay, I had the tests also copied in from the previous request. I'm going to rename this thing as close issues. So if I do it again, it's probably going to give me an error because it's already closed. Okay, so now we have this one request that closes an issue. So we can transform this into a variable. Okay. So if I don't have this variable defined, it's not going to do anything. So I'm just going to temporarily see if I can do that by hard coding. Okay, so this one works. So we have one request that fetches all the issues and one request that closes one issue. So now what we need is to be able to get the list of issues and loop over them and then do this one by one, right? So what we're going to do is insert one request in the middle of them. So generally you can do something that runs between the two requests. But one thing I like to do is insert a dummy request between the two so that it doesn't actually do anything on its own by sending a request, but I can still put scripts inside them that I can use to do anything that I would want to automate, right? So I'm going to do like something like Postman echo, which on its own is not going to do anything, but I can put in scripts that can help me automate the stuff. Right? So I have just put this one particular request in the middle between the two. I'm going to call it iterator.
So you're doing that just to be more explicit instead of jamming this code in a test script?
Yeah.
Okay.
vn.variables.get. Okay, so I have these three requests, and what I'm going to do is actually try implementing this part itself. So I'm looking for the variable that I had set in my first request that had the list of IDs, which is issue IDs. And I will use the same and read them in the next request. And what I can do is just say issue IDs dot for each. And I'm going to okay, so we have the first request that fetches all the issues. We have second one that is iterating. We have third one that is closing. So if we run this collection, it should basically iterate. But since we are setting the, since we are not looping and calling the request for each of the IDs, it is just going to close the last one. If we see, okay. If we go back to the repo, yeah, so we see like one of those issues closed, right? So what we can do now is use pm.send request. Now say for each of these requests, call
How come you're using PM send request instead of Postman set next request? Is it to iterate inside the iterator?
So I can do two things. One is either send request inside of this as well, or I can also do set next request. Actually, that's a good idea. We can do that as well. We can do postman.set next request and do this one. actually
Wait,
exit.
but that's
So
already going to run. Don't you need to set it to null? Don't you need to like set the close issues GraphQL to go back to iterator or something?
yeah, so one thing I'm going to do is actually use a library here. I'm going to say I need async, and then I'm just going to say for each of these things, I am running something in parallel. And inside of them, if I do a set next request, right? So if I'm doing like an asynchronous call, like send request, so this would help me to wait for each of them to complete. So for each of these requests, I can actually do one by one and then wait and finally do a set. Right? But in this case, you're doing, since this is not an asynchronous one, we're just doing a set next request. So what you're saying is actually right. So what we would need to do is something slightly different. And once this is done, we would have to set this thing as null, right? So what I'm going to do is, so I'm going to pick the first one and then say I am setting this to the first one. And what I will do is after closing, just pop that item.
So pop it off, and then if there's still more stuff in the array, then go back to iterator?
Yeah. So we have the first request that is running, which is giving the list of this thing. We have the set next request, which is basically just setting the first one to close in the third request. And the third request is after it is done, it's going to pop the request that it just closed. And then finally, it will just go back. It will set next request. If the thing is done, it will exit. Otherwise, it will set next to the second. Right. So what I'm trying to do here is get all the issue IDs, and I am going to do. So one thing I am trying to do is I know that this thing is going to be an array. So I can also say this thing dot concat and do this. And now I should have array methods autocomplete here as well, which I am not. So another trick that you can use is basically if you're wondering like how, what part of JavaScript that you want to use, and to quickly validate whether it works before sending, you can also just quickly pop in DevTools because this thing is also actually built on Chrome. So a quick trick that I use is just pop in DevTools and just quickly validate the JavaScript that I want to run, right? So I have arrays, and what I'm trying to do is remove or right? So it just removes the first item, which is what I'm trying to do, right? And if I have X, so now it had the first one. So now what I'm trying to do is X dot unshift.
I do this a lot in the Chrome DevTools, but I hadn't thought to do it in the Postman DevTools. Oh, stop.
So another easy thing that I'm going to do is try to quickly populate the list of IDs that are left. So I can just do something like so now if I have this thing, I have the first one in. Just do you want to help me out populating the second half of the array?
Ah! Can we have the Twitch chat help out, please?
So what we're trying to do is create an array except the first item.
So you just want to remove the first item?
Yeah.
Honestly, I would have just unshifted and then saved the remaining thing to a variable.
Okay, let's try that.
But I feel like there's other more sophisticated ways to do that. If anybody in the chatter. Oh gosh, we're nearing the end of our time, Kamal. Let's get. I don't think we have time to schedule a monitor, but I think we have time to wrap up to fix the JavaScript.
Okay.
Array shift. Huh? VDespa is saying array shift. Array.shift.
Array.shift is still like giving me the first one. And oh, yes. Thank you, Vidaspa.
What?
So it just like shifted the first one and then retained and mutated the original one. So
Oh,
I
it
can just
mutates
do,
it.
yeah. And now I can set this as the new issue IDs. And if I am done with my thing,
If there's still more items in the array,
go back to the
iterator.
Do you think this is going to work?
Let's take a look at the code under iterator.
So what we're trying to do is basically get the first item and then set that as an ID to close.
Okay.
And then in the second one, we are, actually we need to remove this one. So in the second one, we are deleting the issue that is set as the active one, and then we are removing that, and then we're replacing it with the same issue IDs, which when it goes back to this one is going to set the top one.
And you saved under close issues GraphQL, you did save the array issues ID. Okay. Yeah, let's try it. Wait.
Let's try it.
Somebody said you need to use, Despa said you need to use Postman set next request null. Well, so
since this is the last request, if I don't go through this, it's going to end.
Yeah. Theoretically.
Unless this thing goes into an infinite loop.
We have 2 left in the queue.
Okay, so we have an error. Issue ID is not defined. plurals.
Typo.
Did it
I
work?
think it worked.
So we had close called 3 times, and it should have closed all issues. Yay!
Closed.
We're done.
Done. So now you just got to build this for the
So
Postman engineering team to close all of our regular issues then, huh?
we would put a little bit more logic in the test script where you say like if it's like idle or done, we close it. But in theory, it should work.
Yeah. Cool. So we didn't have time. I actually, we are a little past time. We didn't have time to do this, but all we would need to do is just schedule a monitor. Can you just show us where that is in the interface?
So you can just pop in this arrow and then go to this drop down, and you would see this monitor option. If you just click on it, you will have all of these pre-populated. If you just create, you would have a link to this one. So if I can actually go to check the monitor results, I should actually see the monitor created for this one.
Okay, I said we didn't have time to create the monitor, but Kamal just created the
But
monitor.
actually did.
So it's not hard to do, is the point. It's scheduled but hasn't run yet, but now you can go ahead and manually trigger it. And I don't even remember the settings that you had for the frequency, but you can run it like, you know, every 5 minutes or whatever.
So I just did edit, and it gave me like the schedule. So here we can go and say minute timer or week timer, and then say every day at 12, just go to the repo, iterate, and then
Yeah.
run the same collection. Okay, Joyce, I think we're done.
Yeah, I think that so that collection, we'll go ahead and share that and share the underlying code. That was pretty interesting. I was very excited when you started getting async into the mix because I hadn't used that in the. There are asynchronous requests in the Postman scripting areas where you can use like Postman send requests. But I just haven't used it. So I was very excited to see what you would do. But we will share this, we'll publish it. And then Kamal, thank you so much for, I mean, I don't even, what time is it right now in Bangalore?
It's 1:17 a.m.
Okay, so thank you so much for staying up late tonight and just kind of sharing. I didn't know much about the Monaco editor, and I mean, I really like learning things from you. I like the way you explain things, and we got some good product feedback from some folks in the chat. So hopefully we can invite you back and you can show us some of the other stuff that your team is working on.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much, Joyce, for having me.
Yeah, and Kamal's Twitter handle is up on the screen. So if you want to stay in touch with Kamal, go ahead and reach out directly to him for future requests. Otherwise, we will see you Thursday. Arlemy is going to be on this Thursday. So we got a double header this week. So we'll see you a little bit later this week. Bye. Bye, Kamal.
Bye, Joyce.